Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather on this 23rd day of January 2022. I'm David Percy. First graphic here, hazardous weather graphic showing a red area there over the western interior areas, Yukon Delta, Kuskokwim Valley, up in toward Galena, Kobuk Valley, and the Central Seward Peninsula, as well as the Noatak Valley, Kotzebue Sound, those areas. That's a winter storm warning that kicks into effect tonight and continues through Monday night, and that's for snow anywhere from 5 to 8 inches. Some areas could see up to 12 inches of snow during that time frame. Again, later tonight it begins and then continues through Monday night, and winds gusting to 30 miles an hour along with the snowfall will create poor visibilities, probably less than possibly a quarter mile at times. The Alaska Range, they're under the influence of a high wind warning out for tonight through Monday for winds gusting from the south-southeast 75 miles per hour. And then down around the Anchorage area, Turnagain Arm, higher elevations, East Anchorage, high wind warning out that goes into effect tonight and continues through about midday Monday. And that's for southeast winds gusting possibly as high as 80 miles per hour. It's another round of warm temperatures and wind, or another round of wind coming in tonight and into early Monday. And then a winter weather advisory out for the Kuskokwim Delta and Nunivak Island for snow and some blowing snow, several inches possible, visibilities possibly reduced to less than half a mile at times. That same pattern going on up there on the eastern north slope as well. Winter weather advisory out for later tonight and actually probably through Tuesday for snow and blowing snow and reducing visibilities at times. And from there, going to satellite imagery, you can see the big low pressure area over the Russian Far East there, and the clouds lifting north of St. Lawrence Island after and that looks like maybe possibly some clearing moving in there, the snowfall ending. And then to the south of the next storm pulling northward, you can see rolling right up just south of the Alaska Peninsula here at picture time about 2 p.m. this afternoon, very close to Sand Point, and that's spreading wind and rain into Kodiak Island. Strong winds on the back side of that low to the west, gusting as high as 60 miles an hour at Nikolsky at mid-afternoon. From the north, temperature just above 32 degrees there. Northerly winds pulling the colder air back southward into the Pribilofs after topping out around 28. St. Paul, they're back down in the lower 20s now. And otherwise, rain about a third of an inch falling at Kodiak and 4/10 of an inch at Pedro Bay, while Portage so far has picked up about 1/10 of an inch of precipitation. Cold Bay around a quarter of an inch, so nothing really heavy with this system yet. And up in the interior, western interior, areas of light snow. Haisley, Ruby picking up about an inch or so. Otherwise, most areas had less than that. And winds on the increase. Southwest coast, Platinum seeing gusts 45 miles an hour. And Kalaginek seeing gusts of 54 miles an hour. Pretty windy afternoon also up in Delta Junction, in the Delta Junction area there. Winds south, gusts 55 miles an hour. That pushed the temperature up to 40 degrees this afternoon. Must have felt like spring. And then for the chart here, you can see the warm front bringing the rain, moderate at times, increasing wind as well up to the, Kodiak Island and spreading up into southern Cook Inlet and the western North Gulf Coast mainly. Showers lingered throughout much of the day over the southern southeast coast. They didn't quite end like I thought they would with a higher pressure in there. And then gusty north winds, cold air pulling southward again as that low tracks northward. And those north winds increase over the eastern Aleutians. And a weak low out over the western Bering Sea, really not affecting too much of anything sitting out west there. And a weak trough brought some light snow up over the western Brooks Range to the western Arctic coast. For tonight, you can see that low tracks across the Alaska Peninsula. right up toward Kuskokwim Bay after midnight tonight, and that's about the time we'll probably see the strongest winds from that point from midnight to about 6, 8 a.m. across southern Alaska, where the gradient's the tightest there, especially ahead of the front. And again, possible gusts to 80 miles an hour through mountain passes and the normally windy areas. But it'll be quite windy across all of southern Alaska, up into the Alaska Range and the central interior, as well as Kodiak Island. But winds will start diminishing for Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island as the front moves through and the low starts to pull northward. Pretty light winds by comparison for the western Aleutians and out over the Bering Sea, and diminishing winds there for the Fox Islands. Panhandle, mostly dry night, hopefully. And then rain spreads back in as that weakening front pushes eastward across the Gulf. Look for increasing wind, increasing rain, especially northern Panhandle, and a little harder getting it to the southern areas, but rain possibly moderate to briefly heavy at times for the eastern North Gulf Coast. That'll be mostly in the morning hours, but gradient slackening off, winds coming down considerably in the afternoon across southern Alaska. Stays pretty breezy though, the Kuskokwim Valley, and snow and blowing snow developing as that low tracks into eastern Norton Sound. That'll pull the cold air back into the Yukon Delta, mixed precipitation along that trough axis over the Kuskokwim Valley, and then snow and blowing snow St. Lawrence Island on up through the Bering Strait to the northwest coast. Mostly dry over the eastern interior, just some isolated snow showers scattered around with maybe some clearing as well, and then scattered rain and snow showers over the eastern Aleutians to the Pribilofs, and scattered rain showers for the central and western Aleutians. And then the big storm comes onto the southwest edge of the picture there, so probably see gale force winds up to 45 knots in the forecast for Chimianatu to about Kiska Island, with gales developing for Amchitka Island during the day, and possibly even gale force winds reaching Adak late in the afternoon. Otherwise, light winds from Atka to the Fox Islands under high pressure, light winds, maybe some snow showers lingering around the Pribilofs, but very light winds all the way up to St. Lawrence Island. Probably a dry day with some sunshine over Bristol Bay and much of the southwest interior. Cooler temperatures as well with the clearing and the lighter winds. And then snow showers on the decrease, but lingering. Northern Cook Inlet, Manuska-Susitna Valley, Prince William Sound, rain and snow showers for the North Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle, with even a chance of showers down toward Dixon Entrance. And then northwest winds or west-northwest winds coming to the Arctic coast there. That's going to pull some moisture in. So look for widespread area of light snow, snow and blowing snow for the eastern North Slope on out to the Arctic coast. Possible gusts of 40, 45 miles an hour when that trough swings through there for the eastern Arctic coast, especially around Kaktovik and Barter Island. Otherwise, not too bad over the remainder of the state. And for lows tonight, back below zero, got a little above zero for the Arctic coast North Slope today, but falling a little below zero, not too bad though. Otherwise, teens in the central interior and to near zero out toward the Seward Peninsula and the northwest coast St. Lawrence Island area. But lows in the lower 40s for Bristol Bay under mild southerly flow, near 40 for your low for Kodiak Island, and in the 30s to near 40 for the southeast coast, lower to mid 30s southern Alaska, but in the 20s Copper River Basin and the Susitna Valley. And highs for tomorrow, 30 to 35 in the upper Tanana Valley area or around Delta Junction to say Healy. Could see mid to maybe upper 30s in the 30s Copper River Basin, 35 to 42 south central Alaska and into the southern Kuskokwim Valley, lower 40s for your highs for Bristol Bay, mid 40s Kodiak Island, and lower to mid 40s for the Panhandle. Highs in the 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, mid 30s for the central and western Aleutians, and near 30 for the Pribilofs. And then much colder up around St. Lawrence Island, around 7 for your highs there, but teens for the Brooks Range, North Slope, and up above zero, even warmer than today for the Arctic coast, call it 5 to 12 above. And then that'll fall back below zero, especially on the western Arctic coast with the colder air starting to come back in. You can see Shishmaref down around 10 below, as well as Tin City, and down around almost 10 below for St. Lawrence Island, and single numbers along the west coast and the interior, with lower to mid-teens for the central interior, down into the 20s, south central Alaska, all the Kenai Peninsula, and even Kodiak dropping down to 30 with teens and lower teens for Bristol Bay, but low staying mild over the Panhandle. Lows in the mid-30s to near 40, and then teens for Cold Bay, just a shade under 20 there with the Aleutians in the upper 20s, and the Fox Islands right around 30 degrees. And then that'll be followed by highs on Tuesday afternoon, 40 to 45 again for the southeast coast, upper 20s for the Copper River Basin area, upper 20s to maybe mid-30s, lower to mid-30s for south central Alaska. Seward might push up to 37 degrees, mid-30s Kodiak Island, and a little cooler for the Alaska Peninsula, upper 20s to lower 30s there, mid to upper 30s for the Fox Islands, Adak and Atka, mid-30s for Shimi and Attu, and trying to break 30 for the Pribilofs there, call it 29, but below zero for the St. Lawrence Island area, staying below zero for the western Seward Peninsula and the western Arctic coast, but 15 to 20 for the eastern Arctic coast for your highs, and 5 to 15 for the North Slope and the Brooks Range, while the mid and upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, seeing highs in the lower to mid-20s, except toward...
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, Monday morning IFR, Arctic coast, and the western coast of the state there from the western Brooks Range all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula, North Gulf Coast and Kodiak Island, eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, and IFR over most of the Panhandle, marginal VFR, the Aleutians, Bering Sea. And for the afternoon, some VFR breaks out from St. Lawrence Island down along the southwest coast to the Alaska Peninsula, including Nunivak Island. VFR also for Atka, and otherwise mostly marginal there for the remainder of the Aleutian chain. IFR from western Cook Inlet, northeast Bristol Bay, Iliamna Lake, northwestward, right on up across Seward Peninsula to the western Arctic coast into the Selawik and Noatak Valley areas, part of the Kobuk Valley, and a band of IFR just south of the Brooks Range, IFR North Gulf Coast and the northern Panhandle, and better conditions off to the southeast. But Tuesday morning, southeast coast socked in with IFR all the way up to Yakutat, Cordova, Cape St. Elias, Prince William Sound, up to the Talkeetnas and to the Alaska Range. Another batch of IFR, Brooks Range, northern interior there, up across the western central North Slope and Arctic coast. Otherwise, some VFR over the southwest interior to Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island VFR, mostly marginal for the Bering Sea, south of St. Lawrence Island, and the Aleutians, although some VFR breaking out over the Fox Islands. That expands considerably for the afternoon. Good VFR from the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Looks like a VFR day, or at least the afternoon, for south central Alaska, Susitna Valley, up into the central interior, and some VFR also for the Yukon Flats to Eagle. Otherwise marginal for the upper Tanana Valley. Some IFR lingering there, eastern Arctic coast and North Slope. Some of that slipping on down south of the Brooks Range there into the Koyukuk Valley. Otherwise, IFR hung up in the eastern coast range, Yakutat, and the east side of the Panhandle. Anatuvik, marginal VFR at times tomorrow, about the same for Adigan, occasional marginal VFR in either entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR, lowest conditions on the eastern approach of both passes, include rainy as well in that pattern. IFR, lowest on the east entrance, and windy, marginal VFR, but VFR out the north side there into the valley. Isabel, north entrance VFR, otherwise marginal VFR, lowest conditions on the southern approaches of both Isabel and Mentasta. Tanita, IFR possible on the eastern entrance, but better on the west side. And for Portage, mostly IFR, and definitely IFR for Chilkoot and White. Freezing levels at the surface, almost all the way up to the Alaska Range, covering Bristol Bay, north of Bristol Bay, and now north of the Pribilofs, with 2,000 feet into eastern Bristol Bay, north of Kodiak Island, and then 2 to 6,000 feet, or actually 2 to 8,000 feet across central and southern southeast coast. Icing, another slug of moisture coming northward with that next storm as the center pulls northward. South to north flow will push considerable moderate rime icing into the North Gulf Coast and the north coast of the Panhandle. And a band of icing, elevated icing risks exists over all of the western interior up to the western central Arctic coast, including Nunivak Island. And otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula, most of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians will be icing free, as well as the eastern interior. And for the jet stream, Southwest flow, 125 knots right across the eastern North Gulf Coast, actually right over Yakutat, and lighter out over the Bering Sea. 9,000 foot winds. Westerlies 40 knots across the Bering Sea into Bristol Bay. Take a turn to the northeast, 50 to 60 knots across southern Alaska and the Gulf and the northern Panhandle, and lighter to the southern Panhandle as well as the northern interior. Aleutians under high pressure, light winds there. Narrow band 20 to 30 knot winds over the southwest Bering Sea with 30 knot westerlies in over the Pribilofs, or just west of the Pribilofs. And then we've got northwest winds 45 to 50 knots around that low center over eastern Norton Sound, low lifting northward, southwest 45 knots in the Gulf of Alaska. And turbulence, considerable moderate chop below 8,000 feet there, North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay in the eastern Aleutians, as well as all of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta inland areas, better though toward the coast, and moderate chop all the way up into the Kobuk-Selawik Valley areas, light to isolated moderate.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's a dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy in these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the northern lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the northern lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling, you know. It's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business. But if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you get to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, oh, you're elevated, levitating, you are lifted up, your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, you know, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just, you know, spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything, so you got to remember that, you know, luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Monday's marine forecast for the Panhandle, South Coast. South winds 20 to 25 knots. Small craft advisories for the North Coast. Winds will be south 30 knots with seas around 12 feet. Clarence Strait looking at a southeast wind at 20 knots with 4-foot seas, and southeast winds at 15 knots for Stevens Passage, seas 3 feet. Lincoln Glacier Bay, pretty light winds tomorrow, southeast, variable to southeast at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And moving on to the outlook for Tuesday, we've got southeast winds of 15 knots for Stevens Passage, and for Clarence Strait, and for the Stevens Passage area, south winds 15 knots, south winds 20 knots. Lincoln Glacier Bay, outer coastline, south winds 15 knots, seas 13 to 16 feet. And from there, small craft advisories, Prince William Sound tomorrow, east winds 30 knots, seas up to 7 feet. Gale warnings for the eastern North Gulf Coast for southeast winds at 35 knots with 16-foot seas. And the western North Gulf Coast, winds will be southeast at 30 knots and south winds 30 knots. For the Barren Islands, southern Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay, small craft advisories, southeast winds 30 knots, 10-foot seas. Lighter winds and more northeasterly north of the Forelands, about 20 knots. Those become pretty light and variable. Northern Cook Inlet on Tuesday, call it northwest at 10 knots. Southern Cook Inlet northwest at 20 knots. Gale warnings for Kamishak Bay. Northwest winds 35 knots, seas at about 9 feet. West winds 30 knots for the Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast, seas 12 to 13 feet. Middleton Island, southwest winds 20 knots and southeast 20 for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, small craft advisory, south to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, and gale warnings from Sitkinak to Castle Cape for south winds at 35 knots. Alaska Peninsula, west winds 30 knots, and southwest winds 30 knots for Bristol Bay with seas and ice-free waters only at 2 feet. West winds at 10 knots for Bristol Bay on Tuesday, so really coming down on the wind speeds. Even the Alaska Peninsula, Bering Sea side, northwest at 15. And 20-knot winds for the Pacific side from the north. Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. On Alaska Island tomorrow, small craft advisories, northwest winds 30 knots, and winds coming down to 20 knots for Unimak Island out of the northwest. West-northwest 15 to 20 knots, Adak and Atka. West 15, Amchitka Island and Kiska to Shimia looking at a southwest wind at 20 knots. Those pick up almost a storm force, but they don't quite make it. It'll go east 45 knots from Shimia to Kiska. Gale warnings from Chitka Island, southeast coming up to 40 knots, seas building toward 20 feet. Gale warnings for Adak and Atka, southeast increasing to 35 knots. Unamak Island, east to south winds 25 knots, and 15 knot north to northwest breeze for Unalaska Island. Southwest coast, northwest winds 30 to 35 knots. Northwest 20 for the Pribilofs. Gale warning St. Matthew Island, northwest 35 knots. Outlook for Tuesday, those come down quite a bit. Northwest 15 for St. Lawrence Island, the Yukon Delta coast. West 15 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Small craft advisories for the Pribilofs. Northwest winds 25 knots, seas at 8 feet, and north winds at 20 knots for St. Matthew Island. For the Arctic coast, brisk wind advisories, east winds 25 to 30 knots tomorrow, and north 30 knots from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson to Wales. Gale warnings for north winds at 35 knots. Those will become brisk wind advisory level winds as they fall off to about 25 knots from the northwest. Otherwise, westerlies for the Arctic coast, 20 knots on the west side. Brisk wind advisory central and east coast for west winds 25 to 30 knots. And for tonight, low tracks across Bristol Bay, northward across Bristol Bay to Kuskokwim Bay by about 3-4 a.m. in the morning. Tight gradient across southern Alaska for strong winds. High wind warning for the Anchorage area, higher elevations, and Turnagain Arm for gusts to 80 miles per hour tonight into about midday Monday. And also a high wind warning for the Alaska Range. Winter storm warning kicks into effect for the western interior for 5 to 8 inches of snow. Some areas could see 12 inches. That low tracks northward and takes the snow and blowing snow, Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, western Seward Peninsula to the northwest coast. Rain pushes into the Panhandle, but it won't be particularly heavy. Should be heaviest on the eastern North Gulf Coast. And then drier conditions, more quieter and cooler over interior Alaska on Tuesday. Snow and gusty winds and colder temperatures push into the northwest part of the state and Arctic coast, while pretty fair over the Bering Sea, but increasing winds out west.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.